call him. Vincent Occhionero is a member, actually, of the Montreal West End G Club of Rotary for the last 7 years. So he and I have met before. He has worked at the Collins Clarke MacGillivray White Funeral Home. I think they're part of what they call the Dignity Memorial Group. But he's worked at the funeral home on Sherbrooke and Marcel Avenue for 20 years in the role of advanced funeral planner. And I'm sure he's going to tell us what an advanced funeral planner is. I don't know if that means he's really good at his job or if he's working in advance to take care of your funeral. He works closely with different organizations in the area, as well as churches and in the community in general. I don't think, Vince, I don't think Liette Lapointe is going to be joining us. I haven't seen her.
No, she's unfortunately, one of her children came down with COVID. So there's a little bit of anxiety in that household right now.
Okay. I thought it was interesting, though, that you did say that she's the sales director and has been with the organization for 25 years. I like the part where you say she grew up in the industry.
She did. Her father was a funeral director for the group. And
so it would be fun to know what a kid thinks when they're living in that in that kind of a situation. At any rate, Vince, I'm going to hand the floor over to you. I don't know if you need to share your screen or anything.
I've given that a lot of thought, and we normally do a PowerPoint presentation, but it would have entailed a lot of time. So I'm not quite sure and if it's going to work, but I figured it would be best just to speak a little, talk about what advanced funeral planning is and tell you a little bit of our group, the Dignity Funeral Home. And then what, over the past 20 years, what I've come to realize is it's the Q&A that people are looking forward to, in the sense that, because there's a lot of questions when it comes to funeral, because it's not a subject that is openly discussed quite often with members of the family. It's what we describe as a conversation not had, okay, with most individuals. Families.
Well, this is probably a good place to have it. And I invited all of the young people from Rotaract and Interact, all the 18 to 20-year-olds. And I thought, if you want to know what your parents are thinking, come to this meeting. But I think they've all chickened out on us. I'm going to give you the floor.
Thank you. So thank you so much for having me this evening. And as I mentioned earlier, talking about a subject that is most often not discussed, and people are a little hesitant to discuss it. In today's world, we plan for everything. And in my role as an advanced funeral planner, that's what I do. I meet with families and discuss different options that are available to them and explain to them how they could go about taking care of advanced funeral planning. It is not a sales pitch tonight, so please don't think this is a sales pitch. So that's why the Q&A is so important. But I'd like to touch on a few things. We plan for everything in our lives. Weddings, children's education, baptism, christening, you name it. Funeral is something that usually is left on the back burner. And that's the error most families make or individuals make, because it will be taken care of. It will, but hesitant. People don't really want to take to it. So what advanced funeral planning does for our families is allows the individual to have their wishes documented. And it's all there for their loved ones, and it takes away the burden of loved ones of having to make these decisions. Because if you don't tell people, they won't know what to do. I have a story which I always tell about that situation, which was my dad. I'm of Italian descent, Roman Catholic, and he had passed away, and this is many years ago, before I was even involved with the funeral home. And so we did a traditional Italian funeral, casket, viewing, service, burial. Fast forward 18 years later, and we're having a conversation with my mom, and she mentioned to my brother and I that my dad actually wanted to be cremated. And I looked at my mom. At this time, I was involved with the funeral home. And I said, well, Mom, did Dad mention that to you? And she said, yes. I said, so why didn't you tell us? Well, she said, because I didn't want him to be cremated. And I said, Mom, it wasn't your choice. It was Dad's choice to have to do that. All that to say, She never wanted to be cremated, but because of the decision she took for my dad and never shared it with us, we had to have her cremated to have access to our family lot, okay, to be buried with my dad. So that's the importance of discussing your wishes with loved ones. And we have like what we call a personal planning guide, and I'll show you, I don't know if you see this here, that we give out to all our families. It's a guide that we're quite pleased to be able to present or give to our families, and you're all welcome to call me and I'll be more than happy to drop one off to you or mail it to you. And it will allow you to document a lot of information that your loved ones will need in the event of, God forbid, when a death occurs. All documentations, bank accounts, people to be contacted, and your wishes, which is most important. Okay, so planning a funeral is difficult. As I mentioned earlier, it's put on the back burner. You do not want to think about it, but that's an error because without thinking about it and without expressing it, no one will know what your wishes are. In advance funeral planning, I'll talk about the legal aspects of it because a lot of people will be asking questions that way. It can be paid for in advance if you wanted to, and the advantage of that is that you're guaranteeing today's costs, so that in years to come, whenever a death should occur, let's hope many years from now, and of course our costs would have gone up, your estate is not subject to any price increase. So you've secured today's costs. So that's the financial gain to advanced funeral planning. More importantly, as I said, you could document your wishes, so at least your families know that. So you could do an advanced funeral plan, document it without paying for it as well. So that's always an option for families to do. With the funds, if you do decide to go ahead and pre-plan or prepay, legally the funds, by law, we must place the funds into a trust account or send it to an insurance company and the funds stay there. So your funds, the monies, I should say, are protected. We only receive this money, meaning the funeral homes will only receive those funds upon death, and which in turn pay for the cost of the funeral arrangements. Okay, so planning a funeral. Today, what is a funeral? Well, we call it a celebration of life. That's what a funeral is. Compared to in the old days when it was, okay, how many days are we going to be viewed? Is it 3 days? Is it an open casket? And where are we going to be buried? Well, today it's a lot different. There's a lot of different options available, especially with cremation as a means of disposition. It opens up a lot of avenues on how a life can be celebrated. So that's what we encourage people to think about. You don't necessarily have to use a funeral home. We've done services in restaurants and bars and yacht clubs, you name it. We've gone all over the place to help families with that celebration of life. Again, and I'm going to reiterate this most of the evening, you must share your wishes with your loved ones, because if not, well, something like my dad, he didn't get his wishes, and to this day, I regret it and I feel terrible about that. So you don't want that, because the idea is to let your loved ones know what your wishes are that way. Okay. More importantly, I guess, is to share it, as I said earlier, and I know I'm repeating myself that way, but it's getting that down. The obstacle to pre-planning or for people who is basically getting the information ahead of time. That's the only obstacle, because once you've made that decision to get the information, you're over the hurdle, and now you just go along and you hear what it's all about and you get things done that way. It took my uncle 18 years to do his arrangement, and he was so reluctant. He was frightened about it, again in Italian, and you don't talk to them about things like that. But eventually he came up to me and said to me in his wonderful language, "That thing you do, how does that thing work that you do at work?" I said, "What are you talking? What's a thing?" So I knew exactly what he's saying. So I explained it to him, and he and my aunt went ahead and did their arrangements, which was great because, you know, they were able to document it for their two girls, my two cousins, that way. With the Dignity Group of Funeral Homes, the advantage with Collins Clarke and our group is that we're affiliated with over 1,800 funeral homes right across North America. So any plans taken up with our funeral homes here in Montreal, Collins, or any of the Dignity Groups, should you decide to move, can be transferred to any one of our affiliates at no extra cost. They will honor whatever your wishes are as gone up with us or one of our funeral homes here in Montreal. So it's called transportability. of all of our funeral plans. So it's an advantage for our families, us having this affiliation in the Dignity Group of Funeral Homes. And it has happened quite a few times where, especially here in Quebec in the last 15 years, where people have moved and they've told us they've gone to Toronto, Vancouver, down to the States, Florida. So their plan has gone with them. So that's an advantage as well with the Dignity Group of Funeral Homes, that it's transferable to any one of our groups. We also offer an additional protection, which is something that I think is a wonderful product. It's a relocate. It's should a death occur away from Montreal, you're traveling, which we're not doing lately, but hopefully we'll get to that again. And let's say you decide to go to Europe and God forbid a death occurs in Europe. Well, this extra transportation fee will have that individual brought home to Montreal with all costs covered, all plane airfare, any cemetery, any funeral costs at the place of death, all, like I said, airfare documentation that is needed. And it's a one-time payment and you're covered for life. It's called TRPP, Transportation Relocation Protection Plan. So we do offer that as well with our group of funeral homes. So that has helped a lot of our families give them that extra protection. And that is what a funeral arrangement is protecting your loved ones, having them know that your wishes are documented. And if you do decide to prepay for it, you could say to them, and by the way, it's all paid for. So they don't have to worry about financial costs at the time of death. So that's, I guess, what we encourage our families to at least get the information, find out what it's about. But more importantly, again, is please, please, please have that conversation with your loved ones. Let them know what your wishes are. And that is so, so important. I hope that helped you a little bit here. I know I don't have a lot of time, but I could go on for much longer. But I feel it's important to open it up to questions because people are curious. When I go to a dinner party and I've told people what I did for a living, I had to stop the conversation about what pre-planning was all about. So people are curious, they're interested because it's something, as I said, that is not usually discussed. So at dinner parties, I have to stop people. I will say, okay, it's enough already. Let's talk about something else. And it's happened quite a bit to me over the last 20 years and so forth. So please, if there's any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer all questions concerning advanced funeral planning.
Thank you, Vince. I know that Sri has a question for you right away. Just let everybody know you can unmute yourselves either by just touching your space bar for keeping your space bar down when you talk, or you can actually unmute yourselves. And we'll open it up and let's see what Sri has to ask you.
Vince, thank you very much for an educational talk on the funeral planning. I should say educational because I'm a person who has never organized or attended a funeral. So it was a lot of information for me. Anyway, I have two small questions. One, please. I'm not asking this as a joke, but for any funeral planning or any funeral arrangements, either for cremation or for burial, there should be a dead body. Now, my question is, without a dead body, is it possible to organize a funeral?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's my first question. You can answer more in detail. My second question is, you mentioned something about cremation. A lot of people, more and more, is inclined actually to follow the cremation option rather than the burial option for different reasons. So, how would it be if it is a cremation option? Because it's also very important for several communities to get cremated rather than buried. So that's my second question. If you would like to answer me, please.
I will. So I'll address the first question. Absolutely. Because as I mentioned, what is a funeral? It's a celebration of life. So does cremated remains have to be present or human remains? Not necessarily. It could be a memorial service, which we do quite often today. So absolutely. And that is what it is. It's an opportunity for friends and family to gather to remember the life of that individual. Have a drink. I love the Irish wakes. They're the best. I don't know if you said you haven't, but Irish wakes are the best. So it's a celebration of life. We've done different types of services that way for families, and they've made it different. And a lot of time there's laughter coming from our chapel or from the gathering rooms and so forth, with receptions to follow and whatnot. So absolutely, that could take place.
Thank
With
you.
cremation now, as in the last, well, as I mentioned, 20 years, when I first started in the industry, 75% of our services were traditional casket services. And about 25% was cremation. But cremation now, you still could have a traditional funeral and then be cremated as well. So if you want to have that tradition. So basically there's two types of funeral homes can provide to our families. Traditional, where it means the human remains are present in a casket, followed by a burial or a cremation. So that's what we describe as a traditional casket service. You could have viewing, you could have just a service at your church or just wherever you feel is appropriate. And the other type of service is called a memorial service or commemorative, which means cremation is the means of disposition, and that takes place first. And then the gathering and the celebration is done either in the presence of the cremated remains or without, with photos and flowers and music and song and dance and alcohol if need be. So that is what. So those are the two types of funerals that we can provide. Getting back to what I said earlier, today, it's a reverse of the type of services we provide. Today, it's 75% cremation with 25% casket services. So it's been changed that way in the last 20 years. With
Okay,
that type
thank
of
you.
So we've had to adapt to what our families' requests are and needs are, and society's wishes are that way. So thank you for that question. I hope that
I have a
answers your
question.
question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Yes,
you.
thank you.
Glenn is asking a
I
question here.
have a question.
Oh, so go ahead, Human.
Do you do it now online or
I'm sorry.
the celebration? Do you have a plan doing the celebration online?
What we have in our chapels is the use in our chapels. We do have what's called funeral web, which family members, if their family's away and they use our chapel, they will be able to view the service in our chapel. It goes online, it's live, and then it's on that site for the next 20 to 30 days. So families that are not able to attend, and especially here with COVID now, unfortunately, we've had to. More and more families have gone ahead and have done services in our chapel because of that possibility of them. It's a camera that it does not pan. It shows the person in the front and who's speaking and whatnot. But it's audio and video as well. So yes, we do that in our chapel.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Glenn, you have a question?
Yeah, is there a big difference in cost between a traditional funeral, for example, with casket and burial and a memorial service? And is that a factor that's driving any of the shift in choice?
Yes, there is definitely a difference in cost. And what's driving the shift, it's tradition. It's basically what families believe in. What we're seeing, especially at the Collins Clarke home, there's a large Italian community. There's a large African Canadian community that we service, a lot of Irish Catholics and so forth. So a lot of times it's based that way. So those are more traditional. But as for cost, yes, being memorial, you're eliminating, if you're having a memorial service, you are eliminating a lot of the costs that would come about with a traditional casket. So you don't need a casket. You don't need to be embalmed. You don't need to have a hearse or pallbearers. So it reduces the cost of a funeral. Where I would venture to say, depending on merchandise selected, it would reduce the cost by about 1/3 to about 1/3 of what a traditional casket service would cost, and sometimes even less. It all depends on what merchandise is selected. So there's a lot of options with cremation, and that leads to different options with cremated remains, because now what is to happen with the ashes or with the urn? So those options are now opened up. Currently here in Quebec, there's no law saying you can't not keep the ashes at home. There's no law saying you cannot prohibit you cannot scatter ashes. You can't scatter them in walking down St. Catherine Street during the St. Patrick's Day parade. You will not be able to do that. But there's no law currently prohibiting the scattering of ashes here. So there's a lot of different options. You could bury them, you could put them into a niche. So there's savings that way as well for families when cremation is the means of disposition. As compared to a casket, we got to go somewhere to have that person buried. So that's that incurs a lot of costs at cemetery and be it a crypt or a lot with a monument and no burial fees and so forth. So
I have a follow-up to Glenn's question.
Sure.
If you bury somebody in a casket, then you're taking up space in the ground or in the cemetery or whatever, and kind of encroaching on nature. If cremation, you're fouling the air, you're polluting. Now, I've heard and seen a little bit on a new process that they're talking about called liquefaction.
Yes, it's a water cremation. Yeah.
Yeah. How does that work? And I would presume it's much more expensive, but
It is.
information.
It's more time consuming. It is a little more expensive. I've read a little bit about it. We don't provide that service yet here at our funeral home. They're thinking about it. It is a little more expensive. The time frame on that is it does take a long longer than an actual cremation. I don't know a lot about it. What I did read about it. It's sort of, I didn't really like it. It's sort of like it's water being, you're in a vat of some sort, and there's water being, and the actual what chemicals or what is that? I don't think it's chemicals. It's natural, but and that is what the process is. So I'm not 100% sure. So it is available, but I don't know of any funeral homes yet that are providing that service. It's a separate entity that can do what's called aqua cremation, if you want to say it that way.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's a different. I think they're based out of Granby or something like that. The company that was that we did. We've done a lot of not conventions but shows at the convention centers and all that. So that's where I met one of the individuals. I was speaking to him briefly about it and all that. So yeah, but it was very interesting. There was a salon de mort, or what they called, and I was surprised how many people came to that. So you see, there's always an interest in people wanting to know more about funeral. And I have to tell you, and you're gonna laugh, 3/4 of the people were dressed in black. So that was something I thought was quite funny and interesting.
And it wasn't just the morticians.
No, morticians actually had bright green t-shirts and whatnot, and with smiles on our faces.
Okay.
Vince, I just had a couple of comments.
Please.
First of all, my grandfather was the first secretary of the Cremation Society in England over 100 years ago, and he wasn't very popular as a result. He was a vicar in Cheltenham at the time, but it's become a much more obviously accepted form of burial now. Secondly, I've attended 2 web services of funerals in the last month, both in the UK. And it was wonderful that so many people were able to attend from around the world. In fact, one of them, children were in Australia and couldn't make it over in time. And the other one had children in Canada. So whether it's Zoom or the web service, it's a wonderful way, in fact, of getting everybody involved in a funeral service.
Yeah, because people are can't be there, and it's like it's a loved one, and you want to be part of that celebration. So it is a wonderful aid that can be provided to our families that way. I want to tell you, since England, you've heard the expression "saved by the bell," right? In boxing matches and stuff like that. Well, that's actually came from the funeral industry. Saved by the bell. And I think you would know why, because years and years and years ago, caskets always, when they were buried, they had the casket, on top of the casket was a bell. And in those days, there was no embalming, so they would bury the person in the grave, and someone would stay by the graveside the whole night. And if they heard the bell ringing, that means the person was still with us. And that was where the term came, saved by the bell.
Oh my God. Yeah.
So that was,
Okay.
I thought that was pretty funny when I heard that. And again, in England, I have to share this with you. I was reading an article where a funeral director in England insisted that he did not want flowers for his casket, and he wanted a whole bunch of broccoli. So they provided a broccoli spray for the top of his casket. And so, you know, there's a lot of things, a lot of humor that put into a celebration of a life. So that's the important thing. I've told all my family what my wishes are, and my music is selected and whatnot. And I'll tell you this other story. It was I thought it was funny. I had a member of our family had passed away, an Italian gentleman, and my son is 30 years old, wonderful human being, a great kid, believes in himself, right? So he's not church going, but I'm Roman Catholic, and, you know, I attend church and whatnot. So he said to me, you know, Dad, I will be coming to the service with you today because this gentleman, he liked him, and just to show respect. So I said, fine. So we attended the service and all that. And after the service, he looked at me and he said, well, Dad, all this, and I can't use the term he said, it's BS. He said, it's not happening for you. That's what he said to me. So I said, excuse me, I'm not quite sure. What did you say? He said, well, all this is not happening for you. So I said, young man, let me tell you something. I just need to tell you this. You're not invited to my funeral. That's what I told him. And he didn't know what to say. So I put him in his place. Okay, so he knows what my wishes are. So again, there you go.
Okay. Can I come in here for a second for a comment, Jim?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. You said something about the liquid cremation or something. Yes. Yeah. I don't know how popular this news has been in this part of the world, but you know, the Saudi journalist called Jamal Khashoggi. Yeah, everyone knows him. He was supposed to have been murdered in Turkish embassy or Saudi embassy in Istanbul. His body was never traced, or no trace was ever found.
Yeah.
And it was said that it was destroyed using acid, possibly sulfuric acid or hydrochloric acid. So I don't know if this liquid cremation uses some kind of acid and if that is effective. It may be very expensive, but I'm just wondering if that is one process they are going to use, because doing it in sea, throwing it out, dead body in the sea is not really a very hygienic way of doing things. So I'm just wondering, that's all. It's a comment.
I'll be curious to see how many people are Googling liquefaction after
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, no kidding.
It was explained to me. It just got under my skin the way it was explained to me. I just cringed when I heard what it was all about. So I don't know. I'm not going to say it's wrong. It's not good or anything, but yeah. Okay.
Tom Burpee, you had a question.
Yes, thanks, Jim. It's about scattering the ashes. Vince, when somebody says to you they would like to go to a river or go to the side of the mountain, just scatter the ashes, do you encourage that? Do you tell them, no, don't do that? How do you handle a question like that?
So that's a very good question. And because this is what I would say to them. A lot of times we have our country home up north, and Mom loved the country home up north. We're going to scatter the ashes beside this tree on the property. So I ask families, what's important to you? Because what is cemetery? Pre-planning started way back when. The pyramids. The pyramids were a final resting place. So that's what it was. Joseph of Arimathea had pre-arrangements done many, many years ago. And that was also a part of it. So cemeteries are a place to go to remember your loved one as a final resting place. If that is important to you, so I ask the individual, then I would say, think about what you're doing. Because if you do scatter your mom in the country home, will that home be in your family's possession forever and ever? You won't be able, and if you do sell it, you can't knock on the door and say, oh, by the way, actually mom is buried in the backyard in an urn or scattered, can I go pay a visit? So you lose that part of the grieving, or not really grieving, but of remembering your loved one. And that is what cemetery is all about. Okay, so yes, I won't discourage them, but I will ask questions so that give them food for thought. So to make them really understand what they're doing, if that's what they're going to do, so that they're headed in the right direction.
Thank you.
You're welcome,
I have a question.
please.
Do you think of using Google, storing a body in Google?
Using Google,
Yes.
in what
I mean,
respect?
like virtual. I wanna go and visit virtually. I can see the name and I can see the people who visited the celebration and everything on Google.
We do, it's what we say
I
we
mean,
do.
I don't have to come from one country to one country to visit. You know, I can visit the same celebration. I can visit it in Google, and my grand, they always can.
We've had some families, not through Google, but we've had families request that their service, be it the visitation, the gathering, the visitation, the service, be it in the chapel or at a church or whatever, and then the cemetery, if it is going to the cemetery, be filmed so that they will always have that memory of their love of that service. We're looking into that as well. We do have capabilities of able to do that. Is it popular? I would say no. What is more popular is what I was explaining to you earlier about using the chapel and seeing the actual funeral. We have something called MEM, or Making Everlasting Memories, which is a internet site that the family can post up to 300 photographs, biography of the person, receive condolences, make a theme to it and all that. And that's what's called like a virtual memory of their loved one. But it's not like action, it's just still photographs and stuff. But you can have it, you can have a slight movement on that site as well. It's called MEM, Making Everlasting Memories. So, and this has all come about because of requests like that.
It would be nice if you have a site, and this will go for almost forever. I mean,
yes, it's on the net and it's there forever and ever as long as the internet is there.
If you have a website on the net,
yeah, and it's there forever.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
We'll
and it's
put it
a
on YouTube for you.
Yeah.
Jim, a longtime manager of Clarke and Calvary on Martel and Sherbert, was a member of our club.
Mr. John Fraser.
John Fraser.
Yeah, I have.
He became president, and on the last day of his presidency, when he spoke to us about his accomplishments for the year, I had spoken to his boss, had a casket delivered with a carrier, and when he was finished his speech, we wheeled in the casket.
That's so funny. I have a story about Mr. Fraser. I learned a lot from Mr. Fraser. When I was first hired to work at Collins on Sherbrooke Street, they said the manager, our director, was Mr. John Fraser. So 1 week went by, 2 weeks went by, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, a month. Almost 2 months went by. I never saw Mr. Fraser. I'm thinking, well, who's this fellow, Mr. Fraser? Well, apparently he had fallen down the stairs and he was off work for 2 months. He had a broken ankle. And I finally got to meet Mr. Fraser. Remarkable. And the only thing about Mr. Fraser, and I shouldn't say this because Donna will probably get mad, he used to sneak French fries in for lunch every day almost. That was what he used to do. And his office always smelled of French fries.
Just back to liquefaction, or whatever we call it. There must be hundreds of thousands of people buried at sea over 2,000 years of warfare and other things. And I suspect the seafaring animals pick them pretty clean.
I would believe so, yeah.
But just think, after that, you get to travel around the world.
Or get caught up in a net somewhere.
That's right, exactly.
I just wanted to make a comment that my mother passed away in 2018. And prior to that, she was almost 90 years old. And prior to that, I got her to discuss what she would like to have done on when she died. And for a long time, she didn't want to discuss it, but finally she did. And so we did prearrange her funeral. And when she finally passed away, myself and my 5 siblings were very thankful that it had been prearranged. Having 6 of us having to deal with that at the time would have been very difficult. And she was a very specific person who was very specific about her wants and needs. She was a Roman Catholic, very practicing Catholic. And so we were able to give her the funeral that she wanted, right down to the music, the flowers, her burial. And it was very wonderful for us that we didn't have to discuss it and come to agreements. And it was a beautiful funeral. It was a beautiful service. And the afterwards was wonderful with our other family members. And so the pre-planning was really a godsend for all of us in the family, that she was finally able to sit down with me and tell me what she wanted. And so it was a wonderful thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I could talk till I'm blue in the face to convince people about that. And again, it's a difficult subject, but I always come down to, I tell people, the truth of the matter is planning a funeral is no one else's responsibility but yours. Because you have to let people know. Don't put that responsibility on anybody else. It's wrong. It's a true gift that you're going to leave with for your loved ones. And those same children, I've seen this happen, would go home and tell, after meeting a couple, and they would have pre-planned, and they went home and spoke to their kids, and they would say, well, first question is something wrong, Mom? Are you not well? Because they went ahead and planned their funeral. That would be the first question. And then the second question is always, well, their comment would be, well, why did you do that? We would have taken care of it. Again, as I said earlier, no, they have to take care of it, and it's unfair. So it's a true gift, and I'm glad your mom did that for you, and I thank you for those comments.
Financially,
so true.
it was a gift as well. You know, we had,
Yeah.
It was financially, it was a wonderful gift.
Absolutely.
And now I have a question though. What if a person pre-plans their funeral, and then they change their mind about the planning that they did? How does one go about changing their?
It's like basically what we do is we make adjustments to the agreement. And it's always, you can always make changes to it, and it's adjusted accordingly. So anything that was pre-planned 5 years earlier, you would be guaranteed the cost of those services that would come forward to your new wishes. Anything new that was added would obviously be at today's cost, but changes could always be made. That's a good thing about it. And in the 20 years, as I said, 75% casket, 25% cremation, and the reverse today, I'm getting a lot of those calls, people asking to make changes to their arrangements.
I only have one quick question.
Absolutely.
The quick question is that you mentioned the law in Quebec that you can't go at St. Patrick's Day and throw down your ashes, but you also mentioned that you work with other provinces in Florida and so on. There obviously are different laws in different places. So
there is different laws. You would have to check the jurisdiction as to wherever it is to make that for sure. But what I was referring to currently in Quebec, there's no law, but they're trying to get people to not keep ashes and have them buried or whatnot. You see, so, but that has not happened as of yet. So yes, thank you.
I would suppose that as long as the funeral home will give you the ashes, you can go out, and if you don't get caught, you can do whatever you want with them. Would there be any jurisdiction at all that would be telling the funeral homes that you may not release the ashes?
Probably parks and all that. Like discreetly, you could do it, okay? Because there's
no. What I'm thinking is, but is there anywhere in North America, let's say, where the government tells you, the funeral home?
That's a good question. I wouldn't be aware of that, Mr. Ferris. You know, I'm sure there were some jurisdictions that would say no, something has to be done with cremated remains, or well, obviously casket. You have to go to a cemetery for a casket burial. But for cremated, like my brother still has his wife at home. He's just not ready yet, you know, to give her a final resting place.
Vincent,
sorry, go ahead, Deborah.
With my mother was cremated, and we rented a casket.
Yeah, so you had a traditional with a rent. That is an option available. You do not have to purchase
for the traditional part, and then she was cremated,
And then cremation takes place.
Buried her in the cemetery. Her ashes were buried in a cemetery.
Yeah.
We actually rented a casket for the traditional.
Yeah, that's what we did for my mom as well, because she was going to be cremated, as I was
So
saying
there are all
earlier.
kinds of things that can be done to do. I mean,
Yeah, it's still considered a traditional funeral, followed by cremation as the means of disposition.
Yeah.
So, and then, like people say, well, I'm being cremated. That won't really doesn't affect the cost as per the funeral, because you're still doing a traditional, so embalming is necessary. It can save a few dollars. Where it is beneficial or savings come about is at the cemetery, because now you're only burying an urn as compared to a casket. So there's a lot more options available at the cemetery end of it.
Okay, I think Tony Layton has a question, if I'm not mistaken.
No, actually, Jim, I don't have a question. I can say from experience, I'll make a comment from experience, putting caskets in the ground these days is a big pain in the butt. And that the cremation or the urns, sticking urns in cemeteries is much, much simpler.
And cheaper.
Yeah, and cheaper. Yeah.
For sure, for sure. I have one last question here, Vince.
Please, thank you.
Do you require a death certificate to be able to perform a service? Let's say somebody's lost at sea or they disappeared and nobody knows where they are. And I don't know, I've heard that it's like you have to wait 7 years before you can pronounce somebody dead or whatever. But what happens if you just don't have a body?
Depending on the circumstance of where, if it was a plane crash or something of that nature, then they would know there would be no body. So they would have been declared that. If it was a disappearance, that's where that law comes in for this. We have to wait 7 years before you could deem or declare the person as passed away. So that question, if it's definite that the person has passed away, a declaration of death, it would all see proof of. We provide proofs of death for our family, but an actual death certificate here in Quebec only comes from the provincial government. So the death has to occur in Quebec to get an official death certificate in Quebec. A lot of the other provinces do not require an official death certificate from the different governments, from the provincial governments. They accept what a funeral home will provide as attestation or proof of death. Here in Quebec, unfortunately, what is required is an official death certificate. As long as the death, and you only could acquire one as long as the death did occur in Quebec. Okay, so I believe, I'm not quite 100% sure, but what you're saying, as long as there is a declaration of death, then no, you don't need a certificate to go ahead with a funeral or anything of that nature.
Thank you.
9/11, for example, 9/11, a lot of people perished and they were never found. So our funeral homes in New York City were doing services with just a watch as a memorial, because they found a watch or something of that nature. So they went ahead and did services that way, you see, in times of that.
Any other questions, boys and girls? With that then, Vince, thank you very much. But
I thank you all for your patience. And like I said, we take care of everything from A to Z for the family when God